Well, let's go ahead and just dive in. We're going to be talking about Christian Science today, how this practice of Christianity helps us feel and experience God and healing in our lives. Everything we're talking about today, the ideas all come from the Bible and from the Christian Science textbook, Science and Health: A Key to the Scriptures by Mary Baker Eddy, which is a book about the Bible, explaining just really how we take what's there and apply it to our lives today, how we really genuinely experience the promise, the hope, and again, the healing that is contained in the ideas and in the examples that we find there. I'm going to start out, though, by just telling you a couple stories, and you'll see I love to explain stuff, including words that mean different things to folks, like God and spirituality and healing. But as far as these two stories go, I'm gonna tell the first one. It's in an old article that I read, just as it's there, and then the second one is a story from my life, which I'll tell it just as I experienced it, and then we'll come back and we'll do some of that unpacking as we go, and look at how some of these lessons can apply to the stuff that we're all thinking and praying about today. So the first story is kind of an oldie but a goodie. It's something that had an impact on me the first time I heard it, and seems pretty relevant to, just beginning to think about how in the world does our spiritual practice have any kind of impact, either at all or beyond ourselves in our communities and in the world. It's a story that was written by a woman who was called by a Secret Service agent. She was a Christian Science practitioner, and she was called by this agent who, I don't know if he studied Christian Science or what his background was. The article didn't say, but of course he worked for the president, and he was calling this woman and another Christian Science practitioner in a particular community where the president was scheduled to go and give a dedicatory speech at the unveiling of some new monument. This is not a recent president, but he was calling, and because he said that the Secret Service had uncovered a plot to assassinate the president at the moment he stood up to give this speech. So he asked these two women to pray as members of their community, for the event that day, and so forth. And they agreed to do that. Well, the whole thing went off without a hitch. There was no problem that day, no assassination attempt in the end. And the two women compared notes afterward about how they had each prayed. And something that was interesting that came out of their conversation was that, along with the ideas about praying for everybody's safety and the power of goodness to just be there in that day, and for that not to be able to be disrupted, for there to be no perpetrator of a crime any more than anyone who could be a victim of that. Thoughts along those lines. Well, they also felt, kind of surprisingly, called to pray about what they felt might be the burden of somebody who is in a kind of office like the president of a country. The kind of stress or pressure that somebody might feel, like kind of the weight of the world is on your shoulders. And they found it remarkable that out of all the things you could pray about, apart from the obvious stuff that they'd been asked to pray about, they had both felt kind of an inspiration come to them, and compelled really to pray about that topic, about any individual in any office, any situation, being able to feel more of God's control, God's inspiration, God's power, helping everybody universally, and not being in the hands of a certain few people or something. Well, the last part of the story, which is the part that stands out to me the most, is that apparently when the president was back and the trip was completed, the press secretary wrapped up their remarks after saying that the trip had gone well and the president enjoyed it, with this quote, which I'm going to read you. That The president says that while on this trip, he felt the lifting of a crushing mental load which descended upon him when he took the oath of office, and from which he had experienced no relief until now. Now, the reason I'm sharing this story is because to me that's pretty arresting. It's not a real easy thing to draw a link. First of all, even between what prayer is and the kind of effect it has in our lives sometimes, but beyond our lives, to draw that link to something in the community or something that, that people on the other side of the world are going through. That link between our prayer and the effect that it has, and how anybody could feel benefited or lifted or comforted by that kind of a prayer. And so to me, this seemed like it just pointed to the idea that, maybe there is a connection. Maybe it does matter when we embrace others, whether it's global leaders or, the kind of unknown soldier, or the worker bee, or just anybody who would seem to go behind the scenes and maybe nameless. Just our prayers may have an effect for the people that are embraced in those prayers. Well, that's the end of that story, and we're going to push pause, and of course there's a lot to explore there, and we'll come back to it. But I'm going to tell you a more microcosmic story now about my life. And this is a story of a time when I was in university, and I was a first-year student. I had declared a particular course of study that seemed like it was important. It seemed like it would have the potential to lead to a career that would be respectable and earn a decent income, and the kind of things that I felt I, like pretty much everybody in the world probably, is told along the way matters in order to have value in our lives, be a valuable person, do good, and then also feel secure and safe in our lives and our finances and so forth along the way. Well, I'd taken on this model, and I'd taken it on with gusto. I didn't just choose a course of study. I just did everything I could think of to have the best resume possible to get into college, and then to have the best resume possible from college to get on to whatever would come next. And so it meant many of the extracurricular activities, clubs and things that I tried to be part of, really about what that was going to look like to somebody else down the road, in order to hopefully achieve this model of success, which would bring me the good that I wanted and felt like I was looking for. Well, it was going all okay until I got really sick. And I ended up spending a couple weeks in the on-campus care facility. During that time, I was tested for tuberculosis because I had similar symptoms. That test came back negative. I did not have tuberculosis, but it was never clear what I did have. I was never diagnosed with anything else. But it didn't seem to be getting better, and it was pretty incapacitating. At some point along the way, I asked a Christian Science practitioner to pray with me. And this is somebody, I mentioned, this is a role that I have now too. It's somebody who's available to pray with people for healing when they are going through difficult circumstances, people looking for an idea of God that actually makes a tangible difference in their lives. And I didn't know this woman. I hadn't talked to her previously. She didn't know me or anything about my life. And I hadn't really opened up to her about the stuff that I was dealing with. I didn't actually think of myself as unhappy or having a problematic course of life at all. But at some point, this woman said to me, kind of out of the blue as far as I was concerned, if you get better, you don't have to go back. And she meant you don't have to go back to doing things the way you were doing them before. And that was a major light bulb moment for me. Where that inspiration had come from, I think it just had to be through prayer. I remember calling my mom and saying, could I just leave school? What would that look like? What did that mean? I came from a family that didn't have money, and the idea of leaving school, giving up a scholarship, was a big deal. But it was like for the first time, I felt a door open and had a sense of a pathway forward. And I started to realize that I really wasn't happy, really didn't want to go back to the way I'd been doing things. And I started to have the idea that there is another way. It looks scary. It looks different than what I've known before. I'm not sure how it goes, but there was a sense that I can reason out from a different basis, something more authentic, something more real. What grounds that? What is real? I'm gonna have to figure that out, but I want it, and I don't want to do anything else anymore. And within a day or two, my health was largely recovered. I did leave school. I went home. I realized once I'd been home for a while, a month or so, almost 2 months, school wasn't the problem. I wanted to go back to school, and I did, but I changed pretty much everything, my course of study and most of those activities that I'd been doing. In that time, I started to really look for what's real, and found more of that through my sense of God and what God's nature means about my life and about where good comes from, and that good isn't necessarily rooted in the models that we're given, that the ways that we're told are kind of exclusive to how to achieve good, or ways that good can be taken out of our lives don't necessarily have the control that they seem to have. And the more I found what I felt like was a deeper source than that, the the stronger I felt, the more sure I felt about how to go forward, what I wanted to study. And I went back to school, and things went well after that, and I did just fine. So let's pause on that story now for a second. There's a commonality in those two stories. It's probably fairly obvious, and it's prayer. Prayer was the thing that seemed to be elemental, key to how there was some kind of a shift or some kind of a progress. So as we talk about our subject today of spiritual discovery and how that betters the world, let's start with prayer. What is that? What does that word mean? Well, in the Bible, in one of the accounts of the Bible, Jesus' students come and ask him, how do you pray? And in one of the accounts in particular, the first thing Jesus says in response, in essence, is go into your closet. And the context of that is he's talking about prayer not being about what it looks like on the surface to other people. It's not about outward actions and motions and ritual. He kind of like saying, take a step back from all that for a minute. And I would even extend that to like, take a step back from your own fear maybe, or your own knee-jerk reaction to things. We've all had moments where we see or are dealing something and dealing with something and have just a reaction to it. Take a step back maybe from your preconceived notions, not just the opinions and notions of others, but maybe your own too. And then he gives what many Christians today call the Lord's Prayer. And we won't look at all of that. But in essence, the Lord's Prayer talks about a little bit about God's nature and a little bit about our relationship with God and what that means. So I think if you look at it in a broad brushstroke kind of a way, when Jesus is asked, how do you pray? He says, take a step back from the fear and the reaction, the surface appearances and opinions and so forth, and get focused on the nature of God and on our relationship with God. Okay, so if that's a little bit what prayer is, then we can all understand what it means to maybe take a step back for a second, but get focused on the nature of God. Well, okay, let's talk about God. God is an infinite subject, so it can mean many different things, that word. But going back to Jesus, one way Jesus talks about God is as spirit. Now, spirit may sound like one of the most abstract, ethereal words that we have in the English language, anything but relevant and present and tangible. But let's just think about that word for a second, because the word spirit is an English translation of a word that was originally written in Greek. And the word as it was used in Greek, actually the exact same word is also translated in Scripture as wind or breath. In fact, that's true not just in the Greek, but in the Hebrew scriptures, which Christians call the Old Testament. That same word, spirit, written by others, said by others, is also is used as wind or breath just as much as it is translated as this word spirit. Why is that important? Well, because something that can feel very abstract, which I think the concept of God can often feel pretty far away for people, I think becomes much more present. I might even say ever present when we think about God like the very air we breathe. We don't think a lot about the air usually, but air is all around us. Air is, like we think about it being necessary for life, even though we're not thinking a lot about our breathing. It's like if it wasn't there, you'd know it real fast. We don't see the wind, but in one of these accounts where Jesus is talking about God as spirit, he actually says, you don't see where the wind comes from or where it's going, but you do see the leaves moving in the trees. So there's the sense of God being ever present, God being life itself, which actually the Bible says that pretty explicitly, that God is our life. The Bible also says that God is love itself and that God is truth itself. And all of those things kind of jive because you think, well, you can't see love. Love is not something that you see, but you see the effect of love, kind of like you see the effect of the wind moving the leaves in the trees. You don't see truth, but you see the effect of truth. You see truth made manifest in integrity and honesty, just like you see love take shape in generosity and kindness and caring and patience and things like that. So the idea is that although God is not something we see, God is ever present. God is a power, the power. In fact, the Bible says that everything that was made by God, and nothing was made that God didn't make. So this idea that God is the creator or the cause of all that has genuine substance and staying power, all that is, in essence, fundamentally real and unavoidable. And that even though we don't see God, we see the effect of God in really everything that flows from that source, all that has life and all that has truth, all that has love. And only in what is good and like God's nature, because the Bible makes it pretty clear that God is pure good and that the same fountain doesn't send forth both fresh water and salty water. So a source of life doesn't send forth death, doesn't send forth destruction and deterioration, imbalance and so forth. Doesn't send forth that which is unloving or untruthful. God is like the very principle of the universe and an undergirding law, which can't be contrary to itself. It just is. It functions. But it's not mindless like a principle of math or something. It's because God is the source of all wisdom and intelligence. God is knowing and caring and loving, and all of that kind of wrapped into one. This is a sense of God, just in a nutshell, that the Bible illustrates over time. Of course, the Bible also has stuff written by authors who talk about God as loving and hating some, and creating and destroying. But I feel like what you see in the course of the scripture is this evolution of the people's idea of God. You see it makes a difference at every step. So it's not about picking and choosing what we like or don't like in the Bible. I'd say everything in the Bible has relevance. Everything in the Bible is rooted in some aspect of God's nature becoming clearer to people, and that making a real difference, moving humanity forward in some way. And all of it is stuff we can still learn from today too. But we see this culminate in the life of Jesus. This is where we see God's nature shine through most clearly. And it's through that lens of Jesus' teachings, his life, his example, that we can look back and interpret the rest of the scripture and draw out its meaning for our lives today. Draw out the clearest sense of what God is and the implications of God's nature for us, for who we are, and for what life is actually made to be like. It means we're not talking about a God that allows evil or uses evil for some purpose of good down the road for some greater good that we can't understand. That's actually like would be a reverse engineering and a kind of turning upside down to try and give explanation to something that we see and we feel that's difficult and terrible, and then looking for some cause, pin it on God. Whereas the Bible seems to do the other thing. It sort of flips that upside down and says, no, the struggles of humanity, the suffering is not to be ignored, but the way we deal with it most effectively is by looking back at what is actually meant to be, what is normal, what is natural in God's nature, and what that means about us. Hence the other part of the prayer, what is God and what does that mean about us? Well, if God is something like what we're talking about, what does that mean about us? What does it mean, well, the Bible starts out, actually, the very first thing it says about any of us, anybody, is that we're made in the very likeness of God. So what does it mean to be made in the likeness of God, like the God we're talking about? Well, that's not a one-off statement, actually, that idea of being made in God's likeness. I'm going to read you a passage here in just a second, but you see this thread going through the Bible. Jesus, for example, says, be perfect as God is perfect. St. Paul, who came after Jesus, said, put off the old man, the old sense of yourself, and put on the new man, your new sense of selfhood, created to be like God. So it's a theme that runs throughout, that we are made like God. We come from God. We are the place where God shines through. Again, life has an expression. Truth, love, intelligence, wisdom are made manifest. We don't see God, but we see the effect of God. And that seems to be what the Bible is saying we are. We are the effect. God is the cause and we're the effect. Not in a cookie cutter kind of a way, but because God is infinite, each of us in our own unique and individual way, but comprised of entirely God-like qualities and characteristics, that's fundamentally who we are and who we're made to be, that's actually what's normal and natural in everybody. We're not shaped and formed so much by the stuff that it feels like we are, but by something better, by something so good. Here's this line from the Bible I'm going to read from you. This is from Isaiah, a Hebrew prophet, who's writing in a kind of poetic way, like it's God talking to us. And he writes, bring my sons from far away and my daughters from the end of the earth, everyone who's called by my name, whom I created for my glory, whom I formed and made. So there's that idea about everybody. Sons from far away, daughters from the ends of the earth. That's everybody. Called by God, called by the name of God. In the Bible, talking about the name of something usually means the authority or the nature of something. And created for my glory is the purpose, is what it seems to say there. To glorify something means to make it known. That's one definition. And so it's like, if we don't see God, but we see the effect of God, well, it seems to be indicating that's what we're here for. We are here to make God known. We are here not just to talk about God or do things in the name of God, but our very being, who we're made to be, is the very expression of God. It makes God known in individual and unique kind of ways. It means that we are made inherently free, that we're made inherently whole and healthy and peaceable, purposeful and valuable. We're made to have everything that we need. We are complete in our very nature. It means that good is fundamentally normal. Good meaning harmony in our health and well-being, harmony in the world around us, harmony in society. It means that good is with us. Good itself, what is good, like a power, like a cause, like a natural force moving, like a current. that good has power, and that good can be understood, and that good can be proved, that good can break through where there seems to be chaos, where there seems to be deterioration or whatever. Anything that is unlike God's nature, that good is not this inert just possibility if we decide to do something good, but good is actually moving. It's a force. It's a law of nature. It is God's nature expressing itself. Like the sun just shines, good flows, and we're part of that. That good flows through us, shines in us. We're one with it in the way that it's made manifest in us. We can't be separated from it. Well, all of this can sound like an interesting theological kind of a concept, but how do we relate that to daily life stuff? Well, let's look back at our stories here for a second. And this is key, because this brings us down now really to the central point of our theme, spiritual discovery. Because spirituality often gets relegated to the realm of just like positive thinking, or just being impractical. Maybe your own tradition that makes you happy, and that's great, but then there's reality. And I would say that that's just not the kind of spirituality that we see in the Bible. In the Bible, we see people who are going through difficult circumstances, in the middle of war, in the middle of famine, outcast from society, labeled incurable. And we see these folks in these very difficult circumstances, when they take a minute and they look to their best sense of what God is. And these are many different people over many kind of different walks of life, men, women, rich, poor, even slightly different ideas about God. But when they turn to their highest sense of what God is, you see that has makes a difference. It has a change in their perspective, causes a change. And then there's an effect that comes from that. And I would say that pattern really is more like what we would just call discovery. Discovery is what we see actually just, moving humanity forward throughout human history. Discovery implies that something is already there. It's not somebody's philosophy or theology. It's a fact of existence. And the more it's understood, the more that fact of existence, or way things naturally work, is understood, the more somebody can build with it and actually do something with it. We see the laws of aerodynamics, as they're discovered and better understood, then you build a plane. Well, nobody just went to a tall hill and thought positively about flying and jumped off. It had nothing to do with positive thinking, but it was a mental journey. It did start first mentally, because there wasn't a tangible plane first. There was just an idea, a concept. But that concept, because it was rooted in something actually a law of the universe, something that is normal, able to be understood, able to be applied, able to build with it, the more it's understood correctly. You see a cause and effect relationship there in any form of discovery that moves humanity forward, including social change, including political change. What is normal and natural, like that all people are equal, can be buried and covered through all kinds of beliefs, justified in lots of different ways, sometimes even through theology. And then you start to see just what breaks through that is more of a sense of what is actually real. No, equality is actually normal. It's actually, some people are not actually inherently better than others because of their gender or their race or their economic climate or anything else. And as the true idea that has always been true becomes more clear, that's discovery. It's a mental journey first and foremost, but as that mental shift takes place, then people can act on it. They can build with it. They can make new laws that better pattern or reflect what has always been true. And I would say that's discovery. Discovery is what has progressed humanity throughout human history. And I would say I feel like that's what we see going on in the Bible too. It's not just somebody's wishful thinking or theology or positive nature. Uh, you know, when they're in the middle of really difficult, tough situations, and they turn to their highest idea about God, and it makes a difference. It's a mental journey. It's a shift in thinking, and then and a way to reason. But then that reasoning leads to action. It leads to something that brings safety, sometimes even to somebody's enemies, in the middle of war, not just themselves, ends war. Uh, it helps somebody find food in the middle of famine, or find health and wholeness again when they'd been labeled incurable, find community again when they'd been outcast from society. Again and again, we see this kind of cause and effect relationship between when people take a step back from the surface appearance of things and the fear and the reaction. And it doesn't mean bury your head in the sand. It means just look to, kind of like Jesus talking about prayer, look to God's nature and what that means about us and reason from that. And then there's a better effect. And I would say, so that's, the theme is spiritual discovery. Well, the word spiritual comes from the word spirit. So God being spirit, that which is spiritual is that which comes from God. So a spiritual discovery is a discovery that may fly in the face of how things seem to be, the opinions, the preconceived notions, the surface appearances, the widely held models, and then give us a new base from which to reason and build and get better results. That's what I feel like we see happening in the Bible. And in many ways, I feel like wherever you see good, wherever you see truth, equality, harmony, breaking through, and really you don't have to look very far in human history. Despite the ups and downs, the tragedies, the difficulties, the kind of feeling of one step forward, two steps back, that we may feel today or at any other time in human history, the overall trajectory of humanity is, on almost every measurable scale, betterment. More safety for more people, more education for more people, more health and well-being, more equality, more freedom, and so forth. It doesn't mean we're done. It doesn't mean that there aren't still things to do, but it shows a pattern of how to think and how to work through the stuff that we deal with, as opposed to the opposite model, which tends to just look at the surface appearance, accept it as fundamental and normal, unavoidable, and then reason out from that basis, which tends to not get us out of the box, the same box that is really the root of the issues that we face anyway. Here's another little analogy in case it's helpful, but if I wrote 7 plus 3 equals on my imaginary board here, you all know that 7 and 3 equals what? 73? No? You know it equals 10. And how do you know? Well, because you know the principle of math and because you've demonstrated that. My kindergartner can do that and is loving it. But what if you didn't know the principle of math? What if all you had was a surface level logic? What if you were simply told that the plus sign means you put them together? So with only surface level logic, you think 7 and 3 together equals 73. There is a certain surface level logic to that. It's not true, but you can see how somebody could think that way. And you can also see how that would cause some suffering. If you tried to do any kind of engineering with that math, or balance your bank account, or even do grocery shopping with that kind of math, it would cause suffering. And I would say, when we think about our lives, when we think about the world, that surface level logic, it does create suffering. My situation that I told you about, I had a certain model of where I thought success and safety and value were going to come from. I was pursuing it in a 7 plus 3 equals 73 kind of a way. It seemed to have a surface level logic. Plenty of other people believed it and were working hard for that kind of model and to find success and the good they were looking for in that way. But in the end, it didn't have as much truth to it as I thought it did. And pursuing something that was not so true brought suffering. I'm not saying it was my fault or that suffering is people's fault. I'm saying that suffering is the root of a misconception in reasoning. And it's not that it comes from us. Misconceptions don't come from somewhere. They don't have a source or a power behind them. They couldn't. You can't create, nothing created 7 + 3 = 73. So the stuff that we face, the misconceptions that get perpetuated, that get sometimes taught and retaught, or you could say, look, I went outside in the cold and I wasn't feeling well, or I had a family member that had a certain disease, and then I had it, and there's a certain surface level logic that we see play out. Call it heredity, call it weather, call it. It's not that we don't see it; we see it, and we have to deal with it. The question is how. How do we deal with it? How do you deal with the 73s of the world? Whether it's in our health, whether it's in our career trajectories, whether it's in, global political kind of situations. To get at the idea that 7 and 3 = 10 is not about blind faith. It's about understanding. It's about understanding the principle of how things really work. From a surface level appearance, how does a 7 and a 3 become a 1 and a 0? On a surface level, there's no logic to that whatsoever. On a mathematical level, there's perfect logic, and it's provable. It's understandable for anybody. It's impersonal. Anybody can do that. I would say that's what I was discovering in my life, where it looked like I was pursuing a model where there was a logic to it, but the results weren't good. It was bringing suffering. And then the more I looked to where good really comes from, it was more like I was getting the 7 and 3 = 10 of life, of where value and wholeness and opportunity and so forth come from. I was discovering that it comes from God. I was discovering more about God's nature and about what that means for us. That's the 7 and 3 = 10. That's the principle of the universe, what God is and what that means for us. There's the clear line of logic that lifts us, and it inspires us, and it saves us. I felt like in this dark, difficult time, a very simple idea of truth shifted the whole landscape for me. And it's what made it become more obvious that there was a way forward. That way had always been there. I discovered it. And the truth of that, it reached me, and it uplifted me, and it helped me see that. And to me, that's what prayer is about. Prayer is about that discovery of what is true. And then it's not the person or somebody's words that heal anybody. It's the truth itself. It's the truth itself as it dawns on us and helps, just kind of wakes us up to, oh, right, this is what is normal. This is what's natural. It changes the landscape. It helps us have an idea of how we move forward. And what we feel and what we know and what we think begins to change in accord with it. And it just becomes obvious. Oh, this is how I move forward. I would say that's what was going on in that first story too. Healing is not about miracles. It's not about mystery. It's not about the unknown. It's about when there is a need, whatever the need may be, our prayers can lead us to that place of inspiration where the true idea is there to be discovered. Sometimes we know what we're looking for. Sometimes we just stumble on it. I have a friend who's an archaeologist, and a lot of times she thinks she knows what she's looking for, and other times she just finds stuff she wasn't looking for. She didn't know it was going to be there. Well, what I feel was happening with those two women when they were praying was they were digging. They were discovering spiritually. They were looking more into God's nature. They thought they knew the reason why, but there was another need there that they weren't aware of, and there was already existed the truth about how cared for that president was at that time, and how God's power was really what was in control. That every child of God has the right to feel that and feel it moving us. They kind of stumbled across that truth, but it was there. It was normal. Truth itself was embracing them as it embraces all of us and communicating, giving us what we need. They were open to it. They tuned in and they found it. And it doesn't matter who's in the room when somebody opens the blinds. When it's dark inside and somebody opens the blinds and it's bright out, the light comes in and it brings light to everybody. In the same way, our prayers bring the light of what is true to whomever is within, the scope of that issue or that, topic or problem. What's true dawns. Like we were talking about, good moves, good causes, good is in action. This is what we're discovering in our prayers. It's not about somebody's power over somebody else. It's actually the opposite of that. It's letting go of any sense of anybody having power for good or for bad, and seeing that there is one law, one cause, one power at work, and discovering that. And it's kind of incredible to just let that dawn on us in new ways, new and rich and diverse and interesting. These are not about abstractions and shallow affirmations. It's about, okay, I'm looking and I'm finding more of what is true and how that line of light is leading me and leading humanity forward. We see this throughout human history, and I know a lot of folks are praying about Ukraine right now. We'll come back to that in a second, but you see, just like looking at the old USSR and how ideas of freedom, ideas of democracy, ideas of equality, took hold of people in the 80s and 90s, and how people began to be so inspired by that they didn't feel afraid anymore, that they took a stand for that in ways they hadn't before. I was watching a documentary and watching this moment when this dictator type individual in one of those now Eastern European countries had called a rally in support of himself. 100,000 people there, and the people for the first time had the courage, the sense of rightness in what was true, and that was normal, and that was not going to be hidden anymore, that they were going to be moved by it, and they were. And there's this, I watched this video, this is the moment this man is lifting his hand to just quiet everybody, and the people for the first time ever just keep chanting. And you see the look on his face, and he's stunned. The mere raise of this guy's hand it had just brought fear, and it was not easy. Violence erupted. The crowd was shot on by the authorities, but within like 5 days, the government had changed. You can't stop it. The flow of good, when it dawns, when people get it, when people feel the power of it, and feel the rightness of it, and the naturalness of it, the unavoidableness of what is good and what is godlike, there's just no power can stop it. No guns, no individuals. Humanity has just proved that again and again and again. And for all the ups and downs and difficulties and tragedies that we see and pray about, there's a force at work, and it's unstoppable. We have to kind of step back and take the big view to see how that's really happening. A good friend of mine has a big print in her office of like galaxies. I mean, it looks like stars. They're uncountable. There's just so many. And she pointed out to me, they're not stars, they're galaxies. Each one of those dots or little swirls itself contains thousands, millions of stars within it, and its own planets and things. When you take the big view, you just think there is something so big that is moving us. There is something so big that is life itself. Life that can't be crushed out. A life that can't be twisted and deteriorated. A life that can't be unbalanced. Whether that means like in our bodies. So many health issues seem to be about an imbalance of this or an imbalance of that. There's a principle, that means a law of harmony, of naturalness, of balance and goodness and wholeness. And it holds the whole universe together. And it applies to the microcosmic stuff as much as the macro stuff, because it's a principle. And that's what God is. So how, maybe is the next question, how do we feel that? How do we discover that. And in a word, Christ. Christ was not just the last name of Jesus. It was a title that was given to him, and it symbolized that divinity that shone through his life, that presence and activity of God that we're talking about, that brightness of truth itself and love and life itself that we just saw so conspicuously, so obviously, so brilliantly through Jesus's life. But that presence and activity of God, it didn't start when Jesus got here and it didn't leave when Jesus left. It's ever present. Jesus showed us something so unique about grace, which in a short phrase is the unearned love of God. Why is it unearned? Because it's already present. Because we're not working our way up to it. We're not trying to earn it. We're not trying to go to church, read the right books, say the right thing in order to earn it. Whatever tools we have at hand are only useful in as much as they are opening our eyes to what already is. It's not on us. It's not a pressure. It's not a burden. It's grace. Grace is the unearned love of God. It's the love of God that is already present, that is already the power, right in the face of the surface appearance that there are other powers, that there are tragedies. It is there for us, embracing us, reminding us, inspiring us, educating us, and showing us its presence and activity so that it may be made manifest, so that we may see it and prove it in our lives, in humanity. Jesus showed us something unique about salvation, which in a short phrase could be the discovery that nothing can separate us from the love of God. He showed us what real power looks like. It's not about human will, and it's not about force. We see that it sometimes seems to succeed for a time, but the real power, the unstoppable power, is lamb-like instead of lion-like. Is an analogy that the Bible has. That people were looking for a Messiah that was a political and military leader. They were looking for a lion, but they found a lamb. They found the kind of qualities and characteristics like humility and love and hungering and thirsting after righteousness, mercifulness that allow us to discover what God is and what God is doing, that allow that light of God to shine through our lives, that allow that light to just do what it does, for it to be obvious to us. Christ is that true idea of God that is coming to us, that is, again, educating and uplifting us. If this is first and foremost a mental shift, it's happening there first in our thinking, in our consciousness. It's a mental journey in a way. As we are uplifted by what is true, that true idea of God that comes to us, that's that same presence and activity of God. We're not mustering that up ourselves. We're the effect. We're the cared for. We're the loved. And that goes for absolutely everybody. When we face struggle, divisions, climate change, war, it's right in the middle of that. It's the immediate ideas that we need to be safe and to deal with the stuff that is an emergency situation. It's also the long-term solutions. It's the ideas that come that give us innovation and creativity and the desire to do what's right, to let go of old patterns of behavior and so forth. Where and how does all that happen? How do those mental shifts happen? How do they happen in us as well as in society and on a global level? That's Christ. That's the true idea of God, waking people up, loving us, showing us the way forward, condemning no one, but destroying what is untrue, the way light destroys darkness. I heard a story from somebody who was in the middle of a battle, basically. It was a non-combatant individual who was in an area where an military action, which was not expected, suddenly took place. But the military action was on behalf of his own country. He was in a foreign country, and he went to the scene along with a few other of Westerners, and it turned into a pretty violent kind of a situation. The people saw him as an outsider, as part of the group that they felt was attacking them, and the way I understand the story is that the group swarmed him and his colleagues, and were beating him quite severely. And at that moment, for reasons I'll explain in a second, his mom on the other side of the globe woke up. It was the middle of the night, her time, and felt the need to pray for her son. And as he was there in the midst of the mob, feeling like it was probably over for him, apparently some big guy grabbed him by the collar and pulled him out and just said, "Today's not your day," and saved him and his friends. And of course, he didn't know his mom was praying at that point, but later they compared notes and found out that it was really the time matched up. Right at that moment was when she had been woken up and felt compelled to pray. What does that? What wakes us up? What gives us the ideas we need? What can reach us even in the middle of immediate situations that feel like they're controlled by a lack of constructive thinking or clear thinking, mob mentality. It can feel scary to feel like there's just mob mentality, whether it's controlling the climate or controlling business or local economy or anything else. But to realize, no, there's an intelligence that's bigger, that transforms, that saves, that reaches all of us. It's not about good people and bad people. It's about whoever, victim or victimizer, is caught up in a 7 + 3 = 73 kind of a mentality, and makes it clear that it's 10. That shows us what's normal, so shows us what's natural, shows us which is fundamental and just a part of what life actually is and what it's like. And not all at once, but just enough to meet the human need at the time, enough to take the next step, which then leads us to the next step, which then leads us to the next step. You see it in stories of again, individuals in war. You see it, I really appreciate the stories of some of the the Nazi leaders who were given the order to just scorch earth, areas where they were serving. One particularly powerful story was the commander in the area of Paris who was told, got the order from Hitler to blow up most of the major monuments of France. If you've ever been there, you can imagine coming this close to those just not existing anymore, except for the individual who thought, I'm not going to do that. And at great risk to himself, and along with a few others who got a similar order, worked out how to avoid doing that. And it wasn't just there. It happened in the Netherlands. It happened in areas of Germany even, where similar orders were given to just blow up bridges and depots and everything else. What causes that? What causes an individual soldier of the lowest rank, or a field commander or a general or anyone else, to have a different idea, to just think differently, let alone a leader, like in the first story? What is it that meets the need, that meets the fears, that overturns the misconceptions? I would say prayer matters. It's not the power of an individual's little juju, kind of prayer. It's the way prayer opens us up to what God is and what God is doing. That's the power. That's the movement. That's the light that dispels the darkness. It's the power of truth itself. It's the truth that is so contagious it catches fire. Like in again in the USSR, looking at how whole countries, sometimes one day after the other or a week later, looked at, independence, freedom, equality, we can stand for that. And suddenly there's a massive shift. There's courage, there's understanding, there's new action, and that action leads to massive change. It's just an idea, but it's an idea that has substance and power more than anything else, that physical could have substance or power in that sense. It's about walking the walk. There's no creed or theology, as much as there is just what is true. and whatever's tuning us into that. And that's what Mary Baker Eddy, she's the founder of this movement, this practice or approach to Christianity. That's what she felt she discovered. That's what's at the root of everything we're talking about today. She talked about it as the science of Christ, or Christian Science, and that is a way of looking at Jesus' life and teachings that take it beyond just kind of churchiness or ritual and practice, and it's really about, what is the eternal, universal, understandable, provable truth at the root of this? What does it mean for our lives right now and today? What does it mean for what I think about the news, and what I think about my relative, and what I think about my neighbor, and what I think about my workplace? How does the light of what God is uplift and shift what that is? Like, really practically, not just saying we believe in it. That's not a science. You don't just say you believe in math. You don't get your math test and write on it, I love math, I believe in math, and then turn your test in. It's how do I discover the principle of what is true here today? Just a little more. Not with any burden on us, but again, in a way that is discovering what it is doing for us, what it is doing around us, and following it, being empowered by it. This has been a healing movement from the beginning. Mary Baker Eddy found significant healing in her life from chronic illness she'd faced from the time she was a little girl, from the effects of a severe accident. And what she was finding, she stood on it. She imparted it to others. She helped other people understand and look at things in this way, and they found healing in their lives. It's a grassroots healing movement in the sense that truth just spread. People who were healed other people, who healed other people, who healed other people. It's been a healing movement because it has to be about the action that follows the dawning of a sense of what's normal and true. Mary Baker Eddy broke through the expectations of many people around her, not just in terms of physical well-being, but this is a woman who lived in the 1800s into the early 1900s, in a time when it was considered literally immoral for a woman to speak in public. But she had an idea of, well, what does it mean to be the place where God shines through? Well, okay, so it means that you help. It means that you heal. It means that you share. So how am I going to do that? It wasn't, what does society think? It wasn't, what's my place? What have I been taught? It was reasoning out from what is God and what does that mean about me? And she spoke and she preached. She wrote this book, Science and Health with Key to the Scriptures, which I mentioned earlier. This book about the Bible and about how we live it, how we experience it. The last 100 pages of this book are all stories of people who were healed of chronic illness, incurable illness, as it was called, and had major life shifts just by reading the book. Again, at a time when it was considered absolutely wrong for a woman to have any voice in spirituality, let alone in health and well-being and things like that. And it wasn't about human will. It wasn't about a forceful personality. It was just about, well, what is truth and what does truth do? And what does that mean about me? She's a real model for what it's like to take any of the preconceived notions, whether it's about our health or about society, and to just walk the walk in terms of standing in the truth, and the way that helps and heals and ripples out and blesses so many people. She pioneered in copyright law. She was a philanthropist. At 87 years old, she started an international newspaper because she felt the need for just accurate information in order to begin to know how to deal with what the world is dealing with, so that you know what to pray about. 87 years old. Well, there's another one. We might not think in such heavy terms today about what a woman can do or not do. There's still stuff to work out there. But, how many people are going to think, well, as I get older, I have less value, I can do less. That's about as, true as thinking that I was going to have more value if I got the right kind of career, the right job title. There's no truth in it. There's no power in it. What does God say we are? What is God doing? We're created by the nature, the authority of God. It's the power's in the truth. And, Jesus promised that whoever follows me will do the works that I do. He didn't put limits on that. He didn't say for a certain period of time or certain groups of people, if you're young, if you're old, if you are religious or not religious. It was a kind of a cause and effect sort of statement. Look at what he was, look at what he did, look at what he taught. Step by step, follow, live it, reason out from it. Don't take anything else on the surface level. That doesn't mean ignore stuff, and it doesn't mean just bury your head in the sand and believe it's all good if things aren't working out. Like in math, if things aren't working out, go back, learn more about the principle in order to get the right answer to the equation. Mary Baker Eddy just felt that this was the natural fulfillment of what Jesus promised so naturally when he talked in that kind of cause and effect way. Follow me, you'll do the works that I do. He talked about a comforter or an advocate, which he described as the Spirit of truth, which will explain all things, teach you all things, lead you into all truth. There is the sense of the naturalness of the dawning of an understanding that is universal, that will lead everybody into truth. And that's the current that we're talking about. That's the force. That's what's at work in humanity. It's what's, to use Bible language, leavening. Like you put yeast into meal and the bread leavens. Not a question of if it's going to leaven, it's just science. So what is the leaven of truth doing? As it leavens humanity, as it moves us forward, we can have this sense that we are not the cause of this. It's not how do I sit down and pray and make the world better. It's how do I pray in a way that helps me step back from the sometimes oppressive view that the world cannot move, that dictators are in charge, or that things are declining, and help turn that around and help me really see the leaven, really see the cause, what is shifting humanity and able to move us forward. See it at work. See what it's doing and what it means. And sometimes we may feel incredulous as we look at statements in the Bible about God's authority and God's presence and God's love, and just feel like, how could that be there with what I see in the news or what I feel in my life? But let it be incredulous, but don't let it go. Consider it. What does that mean? What are the implications of that? Incredulousness can turn into curiosity. Could it be true? Could that actually be what's moving the world forward? Could it be that there is a power moving the world forward? And curiosity can turn into awe as the implications are just of how good the force at work in the world is dawns on us and informs us how to live it right here in our own little ways, moment by moment, step by step, many times just in thought first, right? But also then in action, right where we are, right in what we're doing. We don't have to run out and be the big face on the poster somewhere, to just be the place where that light is shining through, where the leaven is leavening, where the principle of the universe is proving itself and the ability of good to overcome what is unlike God. Anywhere, because if it's being proved anywhere, then the principle of what is true everywhere is being proved. I'm going to read you a quote from the Bible, and then one from Science and Health, and then we'll stop for some questions. This is from St. Paul in the Bible. In 1 Corinthians, he writes, "Now we see things imperfectly, like puzzling reflections in a mirror. But then we will see everything with perfect clarity. All that I know now is partial and incomplete. But then I will know everything completely, just as God now knows me completely." Again, it's an acknowledgement that we seem to see good and not good, all mixed together in this puzzling reflection. But it's also the statement that the good is here. What I now know is partial and incomplete, I will know as God knows, as God already knows who we are, what is normal, what has power. That's dawning, that's what's happening. It's a dawning of what is already real becoming clearer in the way that it takes shape in our lives and in humanity. Mary Baker Eddy wrote this in her book, Science and Health. The conceptions of mortal, erring thought must give way to the ideal of all that is perfect and eternal. Through many generations, human beliefs will be attaining diviner conceptions, and the immortal and perfect model of God's creation will finally be seen as the only true conception of being. She starts the next sentence with the word science. She's talking about the science of Christ. She says it reveals the possibility of achieving all good and sets mortals at work to discover what God has already done. That's grace. The good that is already there, the love that is already there, already defining us, already giving us the idea of God, the true idea of God that moves us forward. Let's take a second, and I'll flip over to look at the questions in just a moment. I do see a question here. Somebody asked, when we're praying about a global issue, is it helpful to have more people praying about it? Is there anything to be gained by having more people doing it? And that's the last part of a longer question, where the questioner also talks about how sometimes in different faith traditions, whole groups of people will get together and pray. And so I would say, first of all, yes, obviously the more people who are tuning into and wanting to discover what is true and natural and normal about God's nature and about us and about what life is like, is helpful. That's always going to be a benefit. But I think I would say it's really helpful to see here that this isn't about numbers of people either, because sometimes when people band together in a big group, the idea is like that the more little individual human lives and personalities, and really it's often a will thing, like, and I'm not being disparaging to anybody, but it's the idea that I cause, or I create, or I co-create with God, or with the power of the universe, or something like that. And the Christian Science point of view is not that. It's more of a discovery. It's a yielding. It's what is God and what is God doing. And so it's not like how many individual wills can we get together to will something, and therefore the more you pile onto that, the more will you'll have behind it, the more power. That doesn't have anything to do with what we're talking about. So the weight, if you will, is in the truth itself. And that's what we're discovering. The power is not in the numbers of the people. The whole point of getting together, or even having lots of people get together and pray, is for all of those individuals to, in their own way and in their own sense of things, be letting the omnipotence of the only power be growing and becoming more clear. It's not many people banding together in lots of little powers to create a bigger power. There's just one. There's just one power. There's just one cause. There's just one life. There's just one truth. And that's what's at work. And obviously, the more that spreads, even sometimes, people who would say, I'm not religious, I don't believe in God. But any idea of truth, anything that's true, that dawns on somebody and makes somebody go, oh, right. Like I mentioned, the commanders in the 40s on the Nazi side, they might not have said I believe in God, but they got a godlike thought. They may have had lots of other not godlike thoughts, but truth, the light of what was normal and natural, pierced through, and it felt more normal, more natural than what they'd believed before, and it felt inevitable, like they had to stand for it. Of course they did, because that's just what was right. It just was what it was. That light pierces through for anybody. That's what we're here to recognize. That's what our prayers are here to acknowledge and to help us discover. It's not for some people and not other people. We can embrace everyone, every global leader and every individual who we may never know, who's there working behind the scenes, and just see that truth, divine truth, is communicating with everybody, is coming to everybody, is natural for everybody to feel and to be uplifted by. So it's not how do we get more bodies or independent little human minds to jump on the bandwagon. It's actually, again, a cause and effect thing. The more we see that everybody already has this connection, and it's already normal and indigenous to everyone, the more we're going to see that shining through, and people each embracing that or letting that light shine through them in their own way. Whether they call it a prayer group or not, it's just anyone standing for what's true is part of that. Part of the kind of prayer group, in a sense, if you just look at prayer as tuning into what's true and acting on it. Hopefully that's helpful for someone who asked that question. Let's see. The members of the branch in Victoria had asked me to pray with them about financial difficulty in their community, shortage of housing and just affordability in life, shortage in staff, employees, even on a local government level. They talked about the ferry not having staff, the police not having staff. I was thinking as I prayed about that myself about actually something that someone who worked with Mary Baker Eddy remembered her saying, that home is not a place, it's a power. So starting first with the idea of there being a shortage of housing, that it's not kind of like the job thing, that I was looking for my good in a particular job and a particular title or amount of money, and it was actually never in that. It was in all good comes from the same source. And then that source, as we turn to it, as we learn more about God, by any name in any way, the more ideas come to us about how to experience God's qualities and characteristics and goodness in our life, sometimes in ways that we don't even expect. That's a power. So then that means home is not a place, it's a power, because all the qualities that we expect to find in housing, shelter and safety and welcome and belonging and so forth, all of those come from God. There's a power behind those qualities and characteristics. So it's not in the wood or the brick or the plaster or whatever. It's in the presence and the activity of God. Cause and effect again, right? If you look at this physical object like a house, if we look at good being contained in something limited and physical, then we got the cause and effect upside down. Whereas if we're looking at it as coming from God and learning more about God, and our sense of God's presence and activity is growing and becoming more ever present to us, more omnipotent to us, the more we see that made manifest, the more we see, oh, I can find those qualities here, and oh, look, I can express those qualities there. And it's like you got to start with the cause in order to see the natural way that plays out and takes shape in our lives. It's not that we aren't going to always get some preconceived idea of what we think we want and the way we think it's going to take shape. It's more like our prayer helps us put that aside, but not lose anything in terms of the right qualities and characteristics that are natural for everybody. We can also pray for others in that way, people who seem to be houseless, homeless, lacking in some way. What does what we're discovering about God's nature show us about the good that is already present and available to them? How does it help us bear witness to that? How does it help us represent that or help others find that in their lives? Reasoning out from what is already true, discovery, right? It's already there. What does that mean? What are the implications? Letting that grow and guide us, inform us. I'm speaking in general ways because every circumstance is individual, but as you take this kind of an approach and you let it be applied really to a specific situation and moment, it's not general anymore. Specific ideas are going to come up that are God-like, that pertain to God's nature and about that moment and that individual. Somebody else that seems to have the same symptoms or the same issues may have just a totally different set of inspiration or ideas that they need that helps lift them out of it. So it's not about the surface stuff, but it comes in deep and specific and relevant ways as we're turning to God and listening for what we need to know, and how that that flow, that movement of good that's leavening and moving humanity forward, what it means for that life and what it means for right now. We can do that for others. We can, refuse to the surface stuff that says, oh, that they don't get along with their family members, or they've given up, or, list out the things that would seem to be at the root of the issue, and just look at, well, what is it about God's nature that flips that on its head, that says, no, nothing can come between them and God's other kids, and break up those relationships and keep them from the resources that can help them move forward in their lives, or that nothing can discourage them to the degree that they can't hear and feel the light of God's guidance moving them, reminding them of their value, reminding them of their potential, reminding them of the good qualities that they have and how needed they are in the world. Seeing that specific stuff that is diametric to the whatever seems to be the root of any given issue, it matters, and it helps us take action in ways that make a difference in the world. You can do that with anything we listed out, housing and affordability of life and stuff, but in any of these circumstances, that's kind of the brushstroke view, the overarching idea of what we're talking about. There's a solution. It's already present. Employees need it. I've had to hire before, and it can seem like there's a small, a shortage or small pool of people to pull from, and you just take that at face value, and you can get discouraged and feel like, how are we going to go forward? But prayer so many times has helped me take a step back, and then the phone rings and it's somebody else, and you realize resources are not as limited as they seem. I read a great article in the Christian Science Monitor, talking about, I believe it was the Monitor, talking about how older folks who have maybe thought that they were going to retire are now finding a lot more opportunity in terms of employment because of, so many people who have not gone back to work yet. And that's kind of like, that might not seem like what you're looking for if you have a narrow view of who you want to hire, but when you step back and you realize there are resources here, not in a second best kind of a way, not in like a plan B kind of a way, but in a way where the very qualities and characteristics that are just right for me, for somebody else, that bring us together, that achieve good, are there. They're there, and our prayer opens us up to that. Our prayer helps us see, oh, where we thought there was a lack over here, someone else is finding opportunity over here, and it is always possible, when we're being guided by that bigger view, that there's always the supply needed to meet the demand. And we can't just say that and kind of sweep it under the rug. It's like every day we see a report or seem to experience shortage in our lives, in our communities, is a moment where we're compelled to go back and discover a little bit more about God. Again, not in a burdensome kind of a way, but in a way that expands our sense of God's nature, that uplifts us and shows us God's even bigger than we thought before, that life is even better than we thought before. That's our daily walk. And there is no Christianity without that. It's not talk, it's not belief, it's the daily walk. It's the daily moment by moment discovering in the face of whatever else seems contrary to it. That's it. That's the deal. But nothing is outside the scope of that. Nothing, because life is the principle of all. God, divine love, is the principle of everything. So there's not some things that, well, that's just governed by economics as I understand it today, or, the labor market as I understand it today. No, there's a principle of good that's bigger and better, and that will also uplift and inform economics and employment and everything else in the long run too. Hopefully that's helpful. I'm going to just check here again. I don't see any new questions coming in. Somebody did ask a question I'm noticing ahead of time, before we started. Do Christian Scientists worship Mary Baker Eddy? Hopefully, by the way you've heard me talk about Mary Baker Eddy today, it should be pretty clear that that's Mary Baker Eddy is seen as the founder, the leader of this movement, somebody who lived it herself and led by example, led from behind in the way that she supported others to lead and prove it for themselves. The way it was always about a principle ultimately that we worship and that leads us forward, that this is all about understanding and following and serving God. So there's no personal worship of anybody because God is the only source, not people. But we can look at great examples in our lives. We can appreciate those, like Mary Baker Eddy, who discovered something so significant that it has helped so many people and changed so many people's idea of how to practice Christianity and in such a practical and healing kind of a way. Another question here. Somebody asked, oh no, I'm sorry. That was a repeat. For some reason, the questions are coming in a different order. Somebody asked, how can we learn to focus more on God's idea in the moment when we experience unexpected emotional shock or confusion? That's a good question. Well, we talked about like kind of taking a step back from shock and fear and confusion, but it doesn't always feel like we know how to do that. And what can feel pretty bad actually is when we think that our ability to take that step back is on us. Like God is waiting for us to get our part right first. Like, okay, if I can take that step back and I can focus on God and I can think about what God means for me, then God will be there to give us the truth that we need to move forward. That puts some level of responsibility and onus on us to be the cause of our own inspiration, our own ability to move forward. Well, but what about in the darkest times when you feel like you don't know how? That would be a real catch-22. That would be, if it's like all you have to do is focus on God, but I can't focus. Well, then what? You're out of luck? No. And that's where coming back to the idea of Christ is so helpful to me, because no element of this, not the first step or any step along the way, is about what we're able to muster up for ourselves. This is not about pulling ourselves up by our own spiritual bootstraps. It's not about forcing ourselves to be good or think the right thoughts or do the right thing. When we feel most desperate, when we feel most confused, most discouraged, it's right there that true idea of God is able to meet us. And there are just endless stories showing that how that works. And so to me, sometimes the prayer that has been the most helpful to me when I feel like I don't even know where to begin is just thank God it's not about me. This is not about, like there's something that flips it on its head when we just kind of, the idea comes and wakes us up that, oh, good. This is like, God is giving me the ideas that I need. God is giving me the inspiration that I need. A very short version of a story. I remember being I was abroad in a very precarious situation in a bus that was on a dirt road around these mountain passes that just looked like it way high up in the mountains in the Himalayas, looking like it could bounce off the side at any time. And then it started snowing and the windshield wipers weren't working. And then members of this group I was in started to experience severe symptoms of altitude sickness. And it was just like, it just kept getting worse. And I remember thinking, I want to pray, but also thinking, I don't know how. I don't know enough to pray. Maybe I can pray for a minute, but I don't know how to pray for, like, this was an 8-hour journey. I don't know enough to pray for 8 hours. And as I sat there and thought about that, this idea came to me about, it was a story in the Bible where soldiers come to take Jesus in the Garden of Gethsemane to take him away to be crucified. And somebody tries to defend him with a sword, Peter, one of his disciples, and fight back against these soldiers. And Jesus says, stop that. Like, that's not what we're doing here. He said, he indicated there are legions of angels, that protect me. And a legion is thousands in the Roman army, and angels, you can think of it in the way traditional art depicts angels, but really the idea of ideas from God that meet us where we're at, that come to us, that's that's kind of the purest sense of what that means. And so as I thought about this line that there were legions of angels, I thought, even when I think I don't know what to think or I don't know how to think, it's a good thing this is about what God is doing. This is about what God is sending, what God is causing. And it just flips it all around. It's not on me. It's not on us to do or cause anything. And at first, I felt some relief from that. I got an image that was kind of a joke, which was like, I pictured these thousands of angels in the more traditional sense of like little cherubs with wings and diapers and whatever. And it's not that I think that's anything real, but it made me laugh. It kind of broke that feeling of fear and pressure. And I imagine this little bus being surrounded by these things with their little, and packed in the thing with feathers everywhere and little cheeks pushed up against the window and stuff. It was a funny moment for me. And then the moment passed, and I suddenly remembered a passage from the Bible that inspired me. And then I remembered a hymn that I used to sing when I was a kid, and ideas just started to come that comforted me, that uplifted me, that showed me more of the good that was going on. I was never great at memorizing scripture. I never made much of an effort to do it, but just all these quotes just came, and they were the ideas that I needed. And I remember being on that bus, and at some point feeling the symptoms of altitude sickness fade from me, and coming around the bend on one of these turns on the mountain roads, and the storm had broken, and there was light coming down through the clouds and hitting this absolutely pristine lake down below. And the mountain, one of the mountains was reflected in the lake. And I just, what had seemed like this, deserted, like difficult, precarious kind of environment, suddenly I saw beauty all around, and I saw life, and I saw goodness going on. It was just a real change in view. And by the end of that day, all these other people who had been experiencing sickness were also healed, except for one guy who was healed by the next day. He was better the next day. But again, that's just sort of a long-winded way of saying the same thing. When it feels like we're in shock or we're confused, it's like, oh, but what is God? What is God doing? How does God think? How is God, communicating? There's nothing that can hold us hostage, not even our own thinking. Nothing has the power to seem like it's us, our lives, our natural thinking, if it's not reflective of what God is and what God is doing. Just looking back at what God is, just does it all. God does it all. There's not one little part we have to muster up through some sense of a selfhood apart from God. Hopefully that's helpful. I'm going to go ahead and wrap up. I'll share one last very brief thought, and then I'll read you 2 quick lines. Recently, kind of going back to those clouds that I was just talking about, and the light that I saw shining through while I was on that bus ride. I was on a flight recently and took off, and it was right in between 2 really big, bad, dark kind of storms. We happened to get out just after one and right before the next one came out, and it was really dark. And as we took off and flew through the clouds and got up above the clouds, of course, it was just bright sunshine. And from that side of the thing, the clouds are all puffy white. They're the same clouds, but on one side they're dark, and one side they're bright white, almost blindingly. And I've seen that many times before, and I've always appreciated the analogy that, even when the clouds seem to obscure things, that the light is there. But what was a little different about that for me was that for the first time ever, it dawned on me that this side has never known the darkness, ever. It's not just that it's always there. It's that from this point of view, like if you only lived here, you would have zero concept of where it just came from. It has never been known. It has never been seen. From the sun's standpoint, there has only ever been bright white puffy clouds. It's not just that it's there, but sometimes it's obscured. It's just, it's all there is from that standpoint. And for some reason that was really helpful to me, really moving to me a couple weeks ago. to just feel like, right, there is something so big and so good here that, kind of like that passage from Paul, just we will know it. And we are, that's what's happening when we get inspiration and when we heal. It's not there coming to here that is good from somewhere else coming to this place down here. It's a kind of a waking up to the view that God has always had, which is more good, which builds to the point where more and more we see that there's never been anything else. that is the power, that is the reality. That's what's dawning on us every time we just get an inkling more of human progress, of human safety, of human righteousness and equality and so forth, of our wholeness and our well-being, of the naturalness of harmonious relationships in our lives. It's rooted in a law and a principle that is ever present and is already there. So I'm going to read you this line from the Bible. This is St. Paul again. He writes, "See, now is the acceptable time. See, now is the day of salvation." I like that nowness of it. That now is the day of salvation. And again, if we think of salvation as that discovery that nothing can separate us from the love of God, it is here and it is now, because God is here and God is now, and God is the source of our ability to make that kind of discovery again and again and again, more and more and more, step by step by step. It's not how do we get there, it's here. It's how do we turn to it? Well, God's showing us. God's empowering us. Now is the time. God's not waiting. There's not something we have to do first. What God is and what God is doing is already present, already now. And finally, this line from Science and Health. Mary Baker writes, "It's possible, yea, it's the duty and privilege of every child, man and woman, to follow in some degree the example of the Master by the demonstration of truth and life, of health and holiness." So it's for everybody. No one's working their way up to this. No one's outside of it. Every child, man, woman, able to follow the example, not just talk about it or think about it, but walk the walk moment by moment, empowered by what God is and what God is doing, giving our consent to that, our willingness to look for it, to listen, to be guided, to be given what we need. Not about something we already know. It's about what God is giving us and how that teaches us and how it provides what we need. And not in abstraction, but in demonstration, in proof of truth, in proof of life, in the way it's made manifest in health and holiness, in goodness. Thank you all so much for taking the time again today. I really appreciate it. I'm grateful to be joining with you. I'm grateful for your prayers. I'm grateful for what you're learning and what you're discovering. The world certainly needs that. The light shines through you uniquely and individually, and we're all needed in the ways that we're discovering that each moment of the day. It uplifts you right along with it. It's not a burden on us, but it also helps and heals the world. Thank you again, and have a great rest of your evening. Take care.